The information provided on this podcast is intended to be educational and informational only and is not considered to be formal legal advice. The listener should not take or refrain from taking action based on its content. Any listener in need of legal opinion upon which to rely in decision-making should consider formally engaging an attorney to review relevant facts in detail and examine the pertinent law as it applies to those facts.
Welcome to Real Estate Milestones, where we explore fascinating topics in commercial real estate with knowledgeable industry experts. I'm your host, Ben Malik, and I'm a young real estate professional who is passionate about adding value to people's lives through the incredible power of real estate. My goal is to help you discover what the heck is going on in the industry and how you can get involved. This is Real Estate Milestones, where your future in real estate lies just around the corner. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Real Estate Milestones. Today, we got a very special guest, Kim Betancourt, who's Fannie Mae's Vice President of Economics and Multifamily Research. She identifies trends in the sector and comes up with an understanding for the future of the housing market. And I think it'll be very informative and helpful for everyone listening today to kind of learn more from an expert in the industry regarding the economic condition, which I know is a hot topic nowadays. So, Kim, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here, Ben. Thanks for having me. I do want to just say a word up front. I need to start by letting you know, and all your listeners know, the views I share with you today are my own, and they're not necessarily those of Fannie Mae or its management. My expectations are based on assumptions. Probably not a surprise to hear that, as most economists are. They are not an indication of Fannie Mae's future business or results, and the impact of future conditions on Fannie Mae will depend on many factors. Okay, we got the legal disclaimer out of the way, so now we can chat.
Well, great. Well, could you start by telling me a little bit more about your background in the industry and how you got to where you are? And then please touch on your first milestone in real estate if you can as well.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that I started out not expecting to be in real estate at all. So when I was in school 100 years ago, I actually wanted to be a school teacher. And so I majored in history, and I was going to be a school teacher until I actually tried student teaching for 1 year and realized I hated children and teaching. And so, and of course, that's a joke, folks. I have my own children, and I barely like them. But anyway, so I just decided that, teaching wasn't for me. I had come from a family of teachers, and you need a lot of patience and just, God bless those people. That's all I'll say. And so that was not for me. And so I decided to go to grad school instead. And I was in grad school, and we had the 1981 and 83 recession hit. So I needed to find a job. I was still in grad school, and I got a job working at a mortgage bank through a friend of mine. His sister worked there. And so I was only going to work there for a year to finish up grad school because I could walk to classes. I had evening classes. I could walk to school after working hours to go to my classes. But lo and behold, after I had gotten my graduate degree and I was working there, I got bit by the real estate bug. That's what I like to say. And I just was fascinated by it. And I was lucky because I got started working at this mortgage bank. It was part of at the time, the largest bank in New Jersey, but this was the mortgage group. And we did everything. We did construction loans. We did all kinds of commercial real estate. We did some single family, and I was in a great spot where I just learned a lot. I had a great boss who answered all my really dopey questions because I didn't know anything about anything. And he was super helpful and was a mentor for many, many years after that. Sadly, he passed away last year. Great miss for me personally, but great guy. So just like he helped me, I am always happy to help others.
Awesome. Well, that's great mentality, and definitely being able to ask questions, whether they seem dopey or dumb or not. Yeah. It's definitely great to ask away. Something I've learned.
Absolutely. Always ask, and I would say most people, they want to help. They want to answer your question and give you some guidance. So definitely always no matter what situation you're in, always ask questions.
Great. And hopefully that still applies today. So ready to ask a bunch of questions from you for sure. So first, could you touch on your first milestone in real estate?
I've had so many, but I guess for me, I was going to say my most recent milestone was when I got accepted into the Counselors of Real Estate. So for some of your listeners, that's a group of people that have many years of experience. It's hard to get into. It's really filled with really smart people focused primarily only on the commercial real estate sector. And somebody there once said to me that the one thing, no matter how smart you think you are and how experienced you think you are, when you meet another counselor of real estate, they probably still know something more than you do. And it's so true. It's a great group of people. So I would say that was sort of towards the end of my career to get into that. But my first one, I would say probably when I got promoted at Citibank and became an officer of the bank, and got to participate in a lot of new products that they were working on, a precursor to CMBS, and working on different structures. At the time, they did their own MBS, their privately placed MBS. This was all very new at the time. This was prior to the '87 crash, which probably many of your listeners weren't even, maybe I'm not even sure if their parents were born yet. But anyway, I would say that was a real milestone for me because it really cemented me on this path for being in real estate.
Yeah, well, that's super exciting. You definitely learned a little bit about the beginning of CMBS. I got pretty interested in it when I was, reading about The Big Short and whatnot. So definitely that's an exciting time. So great. Well, obviously there's been a lot of changes going on recently in the industry. I think anyone reading any news journals, definitely seeing things about interest rates, about speculations about cap rates and everything. But I just want to start by what's the general outlook on the sector nowadays, and what are some of the key things we got to keep in mind?
Right. Yeah. So multifamily, I mean, it's had really strong demand during the first half of 2022, but not that surprising really, because it's really coming from a combination of a few things, primarily favorable demographics, job growth. We've had job growth right through the first half of the year, rising wages, and the increased renter household formations. So, with elevated single family housing prices staying pretty elevated in a lot of places across the country, a lot of renters have stayed in place. They've continued to rent. And again, the demographics are really on our side, where we have the cohort that's most likely to rent are those people aged 20 to 34. So that's Gen Z and some of your younger millennials. And so that grouping of people, the number of them peak in 2024. So it's been growing over the past 10, 15 years. So it's created this perfect storm of demand for multifamily. As a result, we expect it to continue for the rest of the year, although we do expect it to start to moderate a little bit. And that's because last year, rent growth, we estimated rent growth last year to be an unprecedented 10%. This year, we think it's going to probably be closer to 6 to 7%, but that's still way elevated. A normal average rent growth year tends to be about between 2 and 3%, just to give you an idea. And so national trends are expected to stay at this above average, level over the next, the rest of the year, I would say. But keep in mind that those multifamily fundamentals, as well as demand, they can and do change. And they vary depending on where you are, by metro, submarket, some cases even by neighborhood. So that's important to remember. But probably what your listeners are more interested in is further out in the forecast, right? What is it? What do we think over the next, year, 2 years, that type of thing? And so we have a more tempered outlook for the sector, over the next 2 years or so, primarily because of this of stubbornly persistent inflation, recession expectations, and there's a lot of new multifamily supply that we're expecting will be completed and delivered over the next 18 months. And, talk about that in a bit. But so all those things combined, as well as I said, the single family housing prices staying elevated, and those elevated mortgage rates, I think they really are convincing a lot of renters by choice that maybe they'll just stay renting a little while longer.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. I've always thought about the increasing price of housing in terms of like the value of single family homes being definitely something that could drive people to prefer to rent. But now that even if prices go down for homes, interest rates are still a barrier regarding the pricing of single family homes and the affordability of homes for maybe new buyers. So that's a definitely interesting perspective. We can get more into that, but I think a very fascinating trend is how crazy the rent growth has been. So I kind of want to touch on that a little bit more. So I guess the historical is 2 to 3%. What has the rent growth been for the past couple of years? And could you pin down a little more specifically what might be the factors leading to that and why they may not persist?
Sure. So rent growth last year, 2021, we estimated it to be about 10%. But again, it depends who you talk to. There's many other research firms and other data vendors that are out there, and they've got different numbers. I mean, some of them are as high as 15, 16% rent increases last year. So again, it just depends which data you're looking at. But for us, we think it's about 10. And we think that this year, as I said earlier, 6 to 7. We're estimating rent growth for the first half of 2022 was about 4.5%. So again, very elevated. But I will say I want to talk a minute about not only those rent growth, but I do want to talk a little bit about concessions. And I'm not sure that a lot of your listeners are always aware of concessions. And what are concessions? They are discounts on the rent, on the asking rent. So sometimes you'll see, you'll go, around town, or you might even see it advertised. Oh, we're giving you 1 month's free rent, or we'll give, the building might be saying, oh, free gift card for coming in and looking at the apartment and signing a lease. And so these discounts can range from various things. They, like I said, they're usually expressed as a discount off the asking rent. And so we had seen that in, say, June of 2020, that about nearly 16% of all multifamily rental units were estimating to be offering a concession. So that's like the worst of the pandemic, right? June of 2020. And so that number had climbed to about, like I said, about 16%. As of June of this year, it was down to just 5.1%. So a huge decline in the number of units offering concessions. What about the concession rate itself? So that concession rate, again, back in June of last year, was about 8.6%, and that means about a month's free rent, rounded up, right? About a month's free rent. Now, June again, it's it's closer to 8.1%. So it's up a little bit. I mean, it's down a little bit from June of last year. But what was it pre-pandemic? It was closer to 6. But the difference is there's just far fewer units that are offering it, right? What did I just say? It's only about 5% of units offering that discount. So you can find discounts. They're just hard to find. Right. And when you do find them, it's usually like, why would it be so high? Why would it be like almost a month's free rent on average? And it's because it depends what's going on in that neighborhood, right? Or what's near that building. Is there a new building going up that's offering, a good deal for people? That sort of thing. You'll see that type of a discount. So we had this run up in demand last year, or 2020 to 2021. We really saw the demand climb in 2021. And it's come back down. And we see that because there's just so few units offering those concessions, all right, those discounts. And so we've had but what's been driving that? Well, it's been the fact that we've got a lot of people that were coming back to work starting last summer, right? The vaccinations came out and businesses opened up and people started going back out. And so people started saying, and then we started seeing this increasing in job growth and rising wages. And people had gotten stimulus payments. you know? So if maybe they were unemployed, they got the expanded unemployment. That meant that at the time, people were getting that extra $600 a week, I believe it was, on top of their normal unemployment. A lot of people were able to sort of suck that money away. And when we actually look at the data of the personal savings rate at that time, it was very elevated. People were able to save that money. But once the pandemic started to, fade a little bit, and a lot of local economies started opening back up, people started to go venture back out. And guess what else they did? They started renting apartments, right? And I believe that, it appears to me that they used that money that they had saved up between just not going out during the pandemic, getting these stimulus payments from the federal government and other things, and they were able to pay to get these units. And at the time, some people really lucked out and got low rental rates with generous concessions.
Well, yeah, that's definitely an important aspect to ascertain that it's not spoken about as often. So that's very interesting. But to touch on one of the things you mentioned, do you think that a lot of this excess money that has gone into circulation, maybe through stimulus, maybe through a long period of low interest rates, through quantitative easing, would you expect any of the cap rate compression or the increase in property values, both single family and multifamily, would you attribute that to the increase in the money supply, or like just increase in consumer wealth, and then kind of in the future with maybe a reversing of the Fed's programs with quantitative tightening and other things, how could that play out?
Yeah, no, I think that having that extra money definitely helped. Unfortunately, when we look at the data now, a lot of that money is gone, especially for lower income households. So that is the problem, is that people had that money last year, and I think that they spent it on, goods, right? So they came out of started going back to work, and maybe things started opening up. So they started going back out and going back shopping and eating and traveling a little bit and getting that new apartment. And so I think a lot of that money got absorbed. So again, when we look at the data, we can see that if we look at it by quintile, the top, quintile out of the top fifth quintile, they still have enough money. But when we look at the lower in quintiles in terms of household income, that money's pretty much gone. So I think that people took advantage while they could of getting these rents and getting into units. But now that those increases in the rents are starting to really impact their income, because that savings is gone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely thought about that when seeing how far rents increased. That doesn't seem necessarily that wages increased at that same rate. And then when you compare some of these rental rates to the median area income, that sometimes it seems a little bit curious how it's able to be sustained and how it may continue to be sustained. So yeah, what are some factors, or do you think these factors may contribute to bad debt, vacancy rates, rent?
Well, let's talk about vacancy rates. Yeah, no, that's a great segue to vacancy rates. So, even though the vacancy rate declined during the early part of 2022, and it sort of has stabilized as of second quarter. So right now we're pegging it at about 4.75%, which is below the long-term average. The 10-year average for the vacancy rate, we estimate it to be about 5.3%. So it's below that, but we don't believe that it's going to stay there. And why not? Well, one is we have a lot of new supply that's coming online. Remember, I was mentioning that earlier. So there's a lot of apartments that are underway, and they're expected to be delivered this year. And so as they start to deliver, there's going to be more supply. And remember those concessions, I was telling you, not many units are offering them. They will start to see that more units will start to offer them, because now they're competing with this new supply, and that new supply will be giving discounts. So that's going to impact the vacancy rate. And it's coming online just as what? Well, the economy, we're concerned that, starting in early next year, we might enter a recession. So that might slow demand further. So we believe that's another reason that we think we might start to see that vacancy rate creep up We don't think it's going to be huge for this year. Like I said, we think pegging it right now at about 4.75% for the vacancy rate. I think it might end the year around 5. Could climb to 5.25 by year end 2023. But again, like I said, that would still be just around right below that 10-year average. If we look at the 15-year average, it's about 5.8%. So we'd still be below that. Yeah, but that's a good point about the vacancy rate. But right now, even then, that would not be a huge increase to the vacancy rate.
Yeah, it's funny that we're talking about these fractions of percentages, but then when you think about how many units that really is across the country, that it's not insignificant, even though it sounds like a small number. But yeah, definitely not the huge increase, and probably a good sign. So as I want to talk a little bit about how interest rates have risen pretty recently. There's been a couple 75 basis point increases over the summer, which definitely is interesting to be entering the industry at this time, to just learn firsthand what this means and how it works.
Right.
And so definitely wanted to kind of, start by touching on what are interest rates, why is the Fed controlling them, and how they translate into cap rates / property values.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the overall about the interest rates, with the Fed, the Fed is trying, as they've announced, to have more of a soft landing, right? So that the economy just doesn't keep staying overheated and it starts to cool, but it doesn't necessarily impact jobs and throw the economy into a bad recession. So that's their goal. But what does that mean for multifamily? And you're absolutely right. It does tie to cap rates. And why does it tie to cap rates? And well, let me explain what a cap rate is for some of your listeners. So that's short for capitalization rate. And essentially what the cap rate or the capitalization rate is it's the expected yield that an investor wants to receive on a particular property. And it's also used as shorthand for a lot of investors, commercial real estate investors, to indicate risk, the potential risk or the implied risk in a particular property. And so we talk about cap rates sort of in general because it's a good shorthand for commercial real estate investors to kind of gauge whether they think that a particular property or a property type is riskier than others. So for example, multifamily cap rates, they're running at about 4.7% or so. And office cap rates, which I don't have that data in front of me, but from what I've been reading, those kind of office cap rates, they're running much higher. I believe they're running at 8 or 8% or so. So they're running higher. So what does that mean? If you're just a commercial real estate investor, you might say, oh, okay, so if I want to look at the office sector, that's gonna, that might be a little riskier because that's a higher cap rate versus multifamily because that's a lower cap rate. And so it just is a way for them to understand, like, okay, this other investors are perceiving these two sectors to be different in terms of risk, not bad or good, just in terms of levels of risk. So multifamily cap rates, and what we tend to do is we tend to track them in terms of what are they to the 10-year treasury. So we want to see what they are to the 10-year treasury. Why do we do that? You might remember from your Economics 101 classes that the 10-year treasury or the treasury rates are the risk-free rate. So in other words, you put your money in treasuries and you can sleep at night and what return you're going to get. In multifamily, the cap rate is then tracked to that because that's what that property sector is competing with investors. So I'm an investor. Do I want to put my money into a 10-year treasury or do I want to put it into a multifamily property? How much will I get paid if I put it into a multifamily versus putting it into a 10-year treasury? And just like I was talking about the office property before, what is it if I want to do it to a office property or to a hotel or to a retail or something like that? So the 4.7% or so, and that's been there. It's been a little sticky. It's been hovering down there, even though interest rates are climbing. So the spread between the 10-year treasury and the cap rates it's getting tighter. And normally that would be of a concern because you're like, well, are you getting paid for your risk above and beyond what you would be getting for a 10-year treasury? And then clearly investors are feeling pretty comfortable that they're still getting a better deal with multifamily properties. And I believe that it is because of everything we started at the beginning of this when we talked about what are the drivers, what are the fundamentals? The fundamentals are demographics, right? Employment, rising wages, and elevated housing prices and elevated interest rates.
Yeah, and definitely makes a lot of sense. And maybe even you factor in rent growth as a potential reason, because I mean, obviously all those things influence rent growth, but if your rent is growing, that your cap rate is actually becoming higher. So I mean, I guess if rent's growing versus the what you paid for the property.
So if my rents are expected to grow, right, that's going to make my property more valuable. And so if it makes my property more valuable, then what it does is it pushes down the cap rate. Right? So prices rise, the value of the property rises, it pushes down the cap rate because now investors are willing to accept a little less yield for more of a sure thing in their mind.
Right. Yeah.
So that's something else I should definitely take a minute just to explain to your listeners is that, again, so if you see a higher cap rate, that means that the price is lower. Okay. So
relative to the income that the property receives.
That's right. So in other words, so just keep that in mind. If you see a higher cap rate, that means that indicates a lower price value of the property, and a lower cap rate indicates a higher value of the property.
And
sometimes
the lower
people get that confused. So
yeah, it could be confusing. Right, definitely, because other finance majors learn about equity multiples, which is the opposite of a cap rate, where you multiply a number times the revenue or the income.
Yes, that's correct.
So you divide it.
Yes.
Cool. So that's definitely illuminating. And then I guess the last piece of that little problem or that little question is how does rising cap rates, or how does how does rising interest rates, more importantly, how does that affect the volume of transactions and volume of loans and just activity in multifamily in general?
Yeah, right. Because cap rates, what's helping drive transactions, right? Property sales transactions. And so, last year, the data that we received from Real Capital Analytics, they track those transactions, those sales transactions. They estimated that the multifamily sales was more than $350 billion last year, which is a crazy number, absolutely insane. Because in 2019, they estimated that it had been $193 billion. So you can see how much of an increase it was from 2019 to 2021. So thus far this year, running through for the first half of this year, it looks like Real Capital Analytics is estimating those sales were about $150 billion. So that's pretty good for the first 6 months of the year. We are estimating this year that total sales, we had been saying about $210 billion in our July monthly commentary, which is out on our website. But I would say based on that level of transactions, it could be between 210 billion and maybe 230 billion. We'll just have to see what the volume looks like for the remainder of the year. But that's where we're pegging it right about now.
Perfect. Well, yeah, that's very interesting, and yeah, it definitely seems like 2021 might have been an all-time record in terms of transaction volume. I think 2020 was also.
Yeah, well, 2020 it was down quite a bit because when the pandemic hit, a lot of lenders just sort of took a pause because just wasn't sure what was going to happen, and then it started to pick up, and then it really picked up a lot of volume in that 2021 to get us to that huge number. Gotcha.
Yeah, definitely makes sense, and sounds like everyone was super busy. So when the rate hikes this summer happened, didn't seem like everyone was too worried because they finally got to go on their vacation after crazy record numbers. Great. So the last thing I want to ask before we get to the lightning round is, Fannie Mae is obviously a huge part of this business. Most of the people who have mortgages on their houses have your colleagues and you to thank. for the fixed rate mortgages that they get. But so I mean, could you just touch a little bit more on Fannie Mae, tell us what the mission of Fannie Mae is, and how that influences the affordable housing situation in the country?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a number of different programs that the Fannie Mae Multifamily group has instituted to sort of help address, the shortage of affordable multifamily housing and access to that affordable housing. So, just this past past April, Fannie Mae introduced our expanded housing choice initiative, so the EHC. And what is that? It provides a new pricing incentive for Texas and North Carolina multifamily property owners that take the HUD housing choice vouchers. So, and what that is that allows tenants to pay a reduced rent, and then the HUD pays the difference to the property owner. And so those housing choice vouchers, they help provide housing for low-income families, seniors, historically underserved population, people with disabilities, lots of different folks. So the Fannie Mae Expanded Housing Choice Program, it aims to make that rental housing market more inclusive and equitable because it expands that availability of multifamily units that accept the housing choice vouchers from HUD. It's a 12-month initiative starting in Texas and North Carolina. And as we incorporate feedback from customers and key stakeholders and market participants, we'll be seeing if that gets expanded. As part of that initiative, we've partnered with enterprise community partners to help provide resources that help lenders and borrowers understand the program and then get the most out of the HUD Housing Choice Voucher Program. So you need the two together. The other program I wanted to mention is SIA, and this isn't the singer. This is sponsored, initiated affordability. If you haven't figured it out, we love acronyms here at Fannie Mae. And so the SIA incentives is for multifamily borrowers. We introduced SIA last year with our network of DUS lenders, and DUS stands for Delegated Underwriting and Servicing Lenders. So they are Fannie Mae multifamily lenders. And this was part of an effort to help address the nation's shortage of affordable housing, multifamily housing. So what does SIA do? The SIA incentivizes owners to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing and workforce housing. And what does that mean? What it does is it encourages these property owners to seek Fannie Mae financing, and in turn, they agree to rent and income restrictions for the residents living in those conventional workforce housing. So in other words, these are properties that don't have any kind of subsidies or any kind of local or federal subsidies to keep the rent down. So this is just normal conventional housing, multifamily rental housing that's out there. And so this SIA program is just saying, hey, if you keep it affordable, we can give you some incentives to do that. And those incentives are what? Well, lower borrowing costs that we offer to borrowers who agree to either preserve or create a minimum of 20% of the units in the property, keep them affordable to residents earning less than 80% of the area median income, adjusted for the family size over the life of the loan. And that means that the rents can't exceed 30% of the area median income. And the rent and the income restrictions, they're going to be documented in an affordability agreement, and they require an annual certification. So those are just two that I think are really exciting and interesting, and a way to help people now, right? To get out there and help people now. It's not something we have to wait. And this is something that, borrowers can take advantage of immediately. So I think it's just great.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And I know a lot of people listening to this may be able to benefit from that, especially, maybe getting into the industry, but being passionate about this aspect of it, which I know is definitely an important thing to think about nowadays.
Right, definitely.
Great. So you ready for the lightning round?
Sure. Hit me with your best shot.
All right. Well, apparently this is the hardest one. So what superpower would you choose if you could have any superpower?
If I could have any superpower, Yeah, that's not a question you get very often, does it? Um, let's see. I would say, I would say probably invisibility. I think I'd like
Nice.
invisibility. That's right. You know, I'm nosy and I could sneak up and hear what people are saying.
Yeah, no, I see it. It comes in handy.
I can go see some of these borrowers and listen to what they're saying.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah. So
Great.
invisibility, there you go.
Right. Perfect. That's a good one. So what's your favorite book, or what's the one that's helped you the most in your career?
My favorite book. Well, it hasn't helped me in my career, but it has
Hmm.
definitely helped me in my personal life. And
Perfect.
yeah, and it's probably you're probably going to laugh when you hear the title, but it's Pet Cemetery by Stephen King. And you're
Oh.
probably thinking, what the heck is she talking about? How could that help you personally? So here's how this whole story is that remember I told you when I first started out, I was working in the mortgage company of a bank. And again, remember, this is when I didn't know anything. And so I was sitting there and I sat next to our VP secretary, and she was reading this book, Pet Cemetery, during her lunch hour. And she was totally engrossed in it, a little paperback book. And, you know, you got to remember, I'm in grad school. And of course, I think who the heck I am. And I'm like, what are you reading? That's like trash. Why would you read that? And she goes, oh, it's so good. I'm like, it's Stephen King. Like, come on. She goes, oh, it's so good. You've got to read it when I'm done. So she gives me the paperback. And I figure, all right, I'll just read it to be nice, right? Then I find myself awake at 3 a.m. trying to finish this book because I'm
Right.
so engrossed in it. Right? And it's a great book. I will tell you, it is all one of my all-time favorite books. And it has the best last sentence of any book I've ever read. It is
Mm.
just chilling. It is just such a great sentence. Great book. So why has this had a personal and in fact of my personal life? Okay. So because of that, I start now getting my hand on every Stephen King book I can. And I read
Hmm.
every Stephen King book and I read all his novels. Then I read his nonfiction. And in one of his nonfiction, he talks about other fantasy and horror and science fiction writers, and he mentions Harlan Ellison. So then I'm like, who is Harlan Ellison? So now I go everywhere finding Harlan Ellison books, and I'm reading all these Harlan Ellison books. So a couple of years go by, and now I'm at my next job, and I'm working at Citibank in New York, and the girl who sits nearby, she comes into my office. We shared offices then. She's talking to my boss, and she says, "Oh, and I'm going to a convention this week, next weekend, and they've got all these science fiction writers there, and one of them's Harlan Ellison." And I went, "Harlan?" So I turned around and I said to her, "Harlan Ellison? Do you know who he is?" And she's like, "Oh yes." She goes, "And he's going to be at this convention, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Well, I'd like to go." And she's like, "Great, we'll go together." Okay, so we go and I meet Harlan Ellison. It's fabulous, it's fantastic. So then he's like, "Well, I'm going to be at this other convention." And I was like, "Okay, I guess I'll go to that." And when I go to that convention, I meet somebody, a friend, a couple of people, and I make friends with somebody. You're probably wondering, where is she going with the story? And then a few years after that, I met this person. We ended up being friends. His name was Greg. And I go to a holiday party in Brooklyn by myself or with this friend of mine because I had been dating someone and he dumped me right before Christmas. So now I'm fed up and I'm like, that's it. I'm not dating anybody. I've had it. You know, I'm just done. And so she says, "Great, come with me to this Christmas party." And I'm like, "I don't know. It doesn't sound like I'm going to know anybody." She goes, "No, it's going to be fine. Come with me." I go and I see my friend Greg. I'm like, "Oh, thank God, somebody to talk to." And who is Greg talking to? This very handsome, tall guy. And I walk up to him and Greg says, "Kim, do you know John Betancourt?" And I said, "No,
Mm.
I don't know John Betancourt. Nice to meet you." And I said, "Wow, you're really tall. How tall are you?" And of course he's like stammering and he's like, "No, I'm about 6'6" or so." And I'm like, "Oh, I really like tall people. That's great." And blah blah blah. Anyway, long story short, that turned out to be my husband who hates to be asked how tall he is. And somehow that's the first question I ask him, and we still get married a year later. So there you are.
I was
A
hoping that's where it was
long-winded
going.
answer, a long-winded answer to what's my favorite book. It's all because I started reading that book. If I hadn't read that book, I don't think I would have ever met my husband. So there you are.
Awesome. Well, I love it. It's a great story. I appreciate you sharing.
I'm
Yeah,
sure it
that's
wasn't
awesome.
the answer you thought you were going to get.
No, it's fascinating. It's amazing. I'm glad you shared. It's definitely unique. You haven't had many stories that good when it comes to the favorite book, so we appreciate it. So, guess what motivates you to continue each day?
Yeah. So I get asked that question a lot. A lot of people are like, I have a lot of friends in my demographic that are like already retired, or they're like, why aren't you
Mhm.
retiring? What's wrong with you? And I will say, what motivates me every day is I learn something new every day. I am in the best job in the world. I love my job. Although maybe I shouldn't say that if we have Fannie Mae bosses listening to this podcast, but I love my job, and I have the privilege of being able to work on and research and learn whatever I want to learn about, and whatever the market is what's going on in the market and what the business needs to know. And so to me, it just continues my lifelong ambition of learning. And that's what gets me up every day. It's like, what the heck is going to happen today? What am I going to learn today? And then help other people learn. That goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning about asking questions. I love to answer people's questions and help them out. And if you ask me a question I don't know, I am on it. I will find the answer for you. So that's what motivates me every day.
Well, great. Yeah. Well, definitely motivates me as well, if you can tell by this existence of this podcast. So well,
Yes, absolutely. And it's been
great.
great.
Oh, thanks. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
Yes, I would say to tie into that, wanting to learn every day, is to be curious, right? You want to be curious, be interested. What don't you know, and what do you want to learn? I think if you approach your job and your life with this openness of curiosity, and just not to be corny, but a wonder of what is going on, how can I help, how can I be a part of something like this, that sense of curiosity, it will never fail you. It will get you to read books like Pet Sematary. It'll get you to go to conventions and meet interesting people. It'll get you to learn things and go down a path that maybe you wouldn't have gone down if you weren't curious about it.
Yeah,
Think about it. I
that's
could have been a high school history teacher somewhere.
yeah,
And
it does
instead,
sound
I get
like
to do this, which is
right.
fabulous.
Yeah, that is wonderful. That's great advice, and definitely something I like to hold true. So I guess the last question, since I put you on the spot, I want to give you a chance for revenge. So feel free to ask me anything you want to know about me.
Well, what is your favorite book, Ben?
Oh, cool. So I'd say my favorite book is it's Paralandra by C.S. Lewis. It's the
Oh, that's
second
a
book
good
in.
choice.
Yeah, so I wanted to go unconventional too, because I have a lot of favorite real estate and business books, but this one is the one that really struck the awe and the wonder, and like they can't put it down, stay up all night
Yeah.
listening to the audiobook or for reading it, because it's the first book or second book in a series called Out of the Silent Planet, and is written I think in like the 30s. C.S. Lewis is a classic writer, but he's writing about like sci-fi and these space travel themes, like taking a rocket
Mm-hmm.
ship to Mars, and he was writing about this before like we had any idea of how it even works, maybe even like around the time planes were a thing. It's like I don't know how he it's just so interesting to think that people have
Envisioned
always
all that. Yeah.
right, and it's
And he's
beautiful.
just a great writer. I mean, you got a great way with prose.
Yeah, he really is. And but the thing that really gets me is that it's a sci-fi book that, it's really an exploration of like philosophy and theology and like just,
Spirituality. Yeah.
yeah, and spirituality. And it's just, and then like, what is good? Like, what is good? How do you be good? And like, just all these, like, you could say biblical themes or religious themes, but it's more just like philosophical, moral themes. And it's like, a lot of people are, want to read just pure nonfiction to learn. And, sometimes when these theories are packaged in a story, is actually where you do the most learning, because you can really resonate on an emotional level with the characters, and also like envision yourself in the scenarios where you have to be asking yourself these hard moral questions. And it really is what opened me up to fiction, because I used to, spend most of my time reading nonfiction for learning, where I realized there's a lot to learn through fiction, and a lot of enjoyment as well. So that's why it's important to me, and why I love it.
Awesome. Then I'm going to give you a little plug to my husband's website, which is wildsidepress.com. And he publishes many different books on science fiction and fantasy and horror and mystery. So, nice. And he's got stuff back from the 20s and 30s that he's also republishing. So wow. Some very interesting things. So for you to take a look at, and maybe your listeners as well, a little unbiased plug, not really, but there you go.
Yeah, well,
and I will also give a plug for our Fannie Mae research, which you can find at fanniemae.com under the Research and Insights tab, and also on the Multifamily tab there. So,
perfect. Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Listeners will check out both websites.
Definitely. Well, if where else can anyone reach you if they want to learn more about you, or connect, or just explore real estate?
Yeah, so you can find us on, like I said, on the Fannie Mae website, but I am also on Twitter, and my handle is Kim_Betancourt. So you can find me on Twitter as well, and I do tweet out some of our monthly commentaries and some other things that might also be interesting, but also sometimes cartoons and funny things. So you can check me out there.
Well, I know I will definitely be doing that. Well, Kim, I appreciate you very much for coming on the show. I learned a lot today, and this was very fun. So thanks for taking the time to, inform me and the audience on all this stuff. And keep making milestones.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone who's listening, if you enjoyed this episode, please go on Apple Podcasts to leave a review, a 5-star review, and any comments. Always makes me really happy to read those. So I really appreciate it. See you, everybody.